Here we are at Highlands Hammock State Park, home of the State CCC Museum, which is the Conservation Corps Museum, Civilian Conservation Corps, spending the weekend. Sand Hill cranes at the entrance to the Highlands Hammock State Park. Go ahead. This plaque represents the purchase of the Highlands Hammock by Margaret Shipping Roebling to make accessible and to conserve in their natural state in her memory and officers and directors in 1931. Ms. Roebling paid $25,000 for 500 acres for the park. Part of the Highlands Hammocks is the Civilian Conservation Corps that built the buildings, roads, and bridges from 1934 to 1942. This building is the museum for the CCA, but unfortunately it's not open today. But the museum was also part of the Conservation Corps. This statue was dedicated to the men who worked in the CCA camps. This is the ancient hammock trail, and it says here that this is a virgin hammock, which means that it's never been cut or changed. This is an interesting tree on the route, on the hammock trail. It looks like it's one half of the oak, but it's the way it's caved in half. It's very interesting. Interesting pattern of roots growing in the trail from the different trees around us. This tree had fallen across the trail and was cut, and you can see that how hollow and rotted out it was. Probably before it was cut. Some colorful fungi or mushrooms on some of the rotted logs. Here we have ferns growing out of a log that had fallen many years ago. Another large oak on this ancient forest trail. This oak has a lot of ferns growing out of the off the tree. Again, they're air plants, not harming the trail. The tree just using it as a host. This is interesting where the palm tree has grown several sets of root balls along the trunk as it goes up. Usually the root ball is just down at the bottom, but this tree has successive root balls along the trunk as well. Lots of ferns growing along the trail, closing in the trail at some points. Very pretty. Thick ferns along the ancient hammock trail. This is the Fern Garden Trail, which is partial boardwalk and walk through the forest. Deep in my There's a fern forest here. Air plants on the palm trees. Very pretty. Dense foliage. Often when palm trees die and they leave their root ball, a lot of other plants can grow inside of it, therefore transforming it into a potted plant. First trail of the day, the Alexander Blair Big Oak Trail. Walking down the Big Oak Trail. This is a fire bush on the trail. Pretty red flowers. Hummingbirds and butterflies especially like the fire bush. This is the big oak that was mentioned in the trail, but it has been, the top has been splintered off, but the diameter of the trunk is immense. This is again looking at the big oak from another view, and I'll stand up. You can see it's quite tall, but it's broken off at the very top, and there's some branches growing out of the very top of the tree. Out of the stump. But the trunk is massive. Another massive oak tree in on this trail. However, it is again topped out, broken off, but there are several large branches at the top as well. It's a very, very old tree. There's a large cavity underneath where animals may have lived. This is interesting. It's a perfectly round hole where a palm tree grew. Palm tree rotted out and left a perfectly round hole where the roots had stayed. This is the underside of an oak tree that fell. This is the root ball or the root mass of the oak that fell. We'll walk around and see the front of it in a minute, but this is the base of the root ball. Quite massive. This is the front of the tree fall of the root mass that we just saw. The tree is probably about 1.5 feet in diameter, I guess. But the root ball, the root mass, was almost 10 feet across. This is a boardwalk on the Big Oak Trail going through the wet areas. A beautiful fern glade on the boardwalk. Interesting feature of the root on this tree. Typically roots are down on the ground, but this root is coming off the side of the tree and it's solid all the way down to the ground. Very different. Next trail is the Wild Orange Grove Trail. We'll walk down and see if we see any wild oranges or not. Okay, this is the wild orange called trifoliata. I'll zoom in, maybe we can see the little green orange balls on it. But that's the wild orange tree. It's often used as rootstock for other orange varieties. Another really large old oak tree on the wild orange path, again snapped off, so no telling how old it is. Could be hundreds of years old. Next trail is the Young Hammock. In this part of the park, the hammock is still spreading, replacing open pine forest which once stood here. 30-minute walk along this loop trail will allow you to see the change and understand the importance of fire in nature. In this part of the hammock we have oaks, pine, some pine, and palms and palmetto. But it's more open and more airy or spacious than the thick thickets of the other forest. Starting to see more large pines here on this trail as we move out of the wet hammock into drier uplands. Another view of the Young Hammock Trail as it winds through the forest. Over to the left is more hammock with palms and oaks, and over to the right is drier uplands with pines and palms. These are air plants, plants that grow with no root. Well, actually they're rooted on the palm tree, but they're not invasive. They don't harm the palm tree. They just use it as a base on which to grow. Again, air plants growing on the palm tree. This is the Cypress Swamp Boardwalk. A beautiful watery forest. Brown waters reflect the tall trees. See alligators, birds, and snakes. The boardwalk changes to a narrow railing walk through part of the swamp. A picture of the boardwalk going through the wet hammock. Very narrow. It's got one guardrail.
Here is Bill taking a break on our trek on the narrow boardwalk with in memory of Jim Wade. Sit, relax, enjoy, as he would have done.
This is the Allen Alt Vader Trail. It is a trail through palmetto and pine forest. There's a little footbridge going through the pine forest. And over here is more of a panorama of the pines and palmettos. The hiking trail is lined with the featherbush plant, which is a cousin to the blueberry bush. Here's another panorama of the pines and palmetto on this walk. Pinelands were once the predominant ecosystem of of Florida, as they were reduced by development and also by overgrowth of the hardwoods. In our hikes later, we'll see more hardwood hammocks. Throughout the pine forest, you'll see dead pine trees scattered throughout. They're called snags, and they're home to a lot of different animals and insects. Woodpeckers and beetles, and occasionally, if they're big enough, you'll see birds' nests in them as well. The dead pine stumps or snags are very common in the pine forest. Pine forests are typically burned periodically in order to clear them of understory brush, resulting in a panorama of palmetto, shrubs, and pines. Here you can see on the base of this pine tree is the burn marks from a recent burning of the understory.